All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's amazing to see such a full room here. We have a discussion today about news distribution and how it's changed, just so you guys know you're in the right panel here. We have panelists who are going to bring a whole bunch of different perspectives to this idea of how news distribution has changed. So I'm really excited to hear everybody's different points of view, and I'm sure that we're going to have a great discussion afterwards as well. I'm Garrett Goodman. I do business development for Watch It. We're a video creation platform. To my right here, I have Cécile Dehesdin.
Perfect.
Who is the editor of BuzzFeed France. We have Renee Kaplan, who's the head of audience engagement at the Financial Times. We have Luca Forlin, who does strategic partnerships at Google. Yep. And Adriano Ferrano, who is the founder of Watch Up, not to be confused with Watch It, where I work. Yes, Watch Up. So, Cécile, why don't you start by telling us how news distribution has changed in an international context?
Sure. So distribution at BuzzFeed is something that we think a lot about, and it used to be that we thought of being a distributed media company as meaning being a multi-platform media company, so not only on BuzzFeed.com, the website, but also on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Snapchat, basically to be wherever our readers are and not try necessarily to get them to go to the site. And that means, creating content that is made to live outside of the site and to be fine with that, which is not something that a lot of media companies necessarily do. But as BuzzFeed has evolved to become more and more international, so I'm in France, but we have teams in Spain, in the UK, Germany, Australia, India, Canada, Mexico, Japan. That has meant that now we also think of news and content and general distribution as being multi-platform and multilingual. So how do we get something like the big tennis investigation that the UK investigation team did, how do we get it all around the world? And I don't know if you read the scoops about the tennis world that the UK team did, but it was a fairly long-form piece of investigation. And the way we approached it was to work with the team before the release to have sort of like a bullet point version that was in English that we could translate easily and quickly in several languages. And then, for example, for Friends, so we had that, and then as I read the full piece, I realized that some of the tournaments they were talking about were French, like Roland Garros, which has French Open, I think it's called in English. And I was like, oh, let me add some of that in there, or the explanation about the methodology. So I added some of that stuff in there to make it more for the French audience. And that's something that we really think a lot about. Sometimes it's translating directly, sometimes it's adapting content, and sometimes it's using an idea from a country and totally redoing it for another country. So, for example, during the Paris attacks, my team did a piece basically debunking live rumors and false information that was going around on the internet, on the French internet mostly. And so we did that. We were constantly updating it and talking to people on Twitter who were giving us some of those rumors, asking if they were true or not. And we flagged it to the US team. Now, it wouldn't have made sense for them to just translate it because half of the rumors weren't going on in the US, but they had others that weren't happening in France. There were others in English that was going on. So they took the idea so that it was working well and that it was providing a service in a moment that was so full of misinformation and fear for people and worry. And they did their own piece debunking stuff. So I think that was an interesting way of thinking globally and locally at the same time about news that affects people all over the world.
Yeah. It sounds like even, thanks to the internet, we have the opportunity to launch a media company in one language and then actually create different versions of it for different audiences, but it sounds like for you guys it's really central to understand the local audience that you're speaking to, and just straight across translation doesn't necessarily work, which is usually the easiest thing to do, but maybe not the best thing to do.
Yeah, because it's like translation is like only one part of adaptation, if you think about it. It's just the language thing. But adapting means taking into account more than the language. It means taking into account the context, different cultures. Recently in France, the French Minister of Women's Rights, talking about hijabi women, used the N-word. And we did a story about that and called her and asked her what was going on. And the US picked it up. But the interesting thing is that they used what we had written, what she'd said, what was her reaction after, and we had stopped there. They had like 4 paragraphs explaining France's relationship to religion, to the hijab, the laws in place, all of the stuff that obviously we don't need to tell our audience, or at least not in that way. And it's always very interesting for me and for my team as French journalists to look at the English version and realize how foreign we can be to the US in those moments. And I think that was especially interesting because it's often from English to French that we work, so we are used to adding that sort of context. And it was interesting to see that you need the same thing in different ways for a different audience.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because it reminds me a lot of what we were doing at Cafe Babel. Yeah. Each time trying to, in that case, it was almost mandatory to, have a different version, never a translation, really. Right. It goes back to the humanities. That's why, in Liceo Classico here we talk about versione, not about translation. You try to have another version, not a simple translation. Right. While in your case, it's a pick and choose, right?
It really depends on the piece. Some pieces can be just translated and it's enough, maybe because they're universal enough, but a lot of the time you realize it's so much better if you really adapt it. And sometimes you can sometimes it means taking what, recently the US politics team did a piece about how Donald Trump had led people to believe that he had had an affair with Carla Bruni, the former First Lady of France back in the 90s, because Donald Trump is what he does. And I remember that when we read the translation, we were like, wait, the thing that the author put at the end, this is the beginning of our story, right. Because for our audience, that's what we want. Right. So it's always interesting to really not be afraid of getting your hand in the text and really changing it, adding stuff, removing stuff. And that's something that BuzzFeed is very comfortable with and has a whole team growing specifically for adaptation and translation all over the world and through different languages and formats and stuff.
We're talking about adapting for a different audience, and in this case, adapting for a different language audience. But Renee, a lot of what you're looking at doing in audience engagement team is adapting for an audience that's on-site to actually speaking to an audience that's potentially off-platform, right? So what does that look like for you guys?
That looks like a radically new world. And so I think the Financial Times and BuzzFeed probably couldn't be more different, which is fascinating that we're thinking about the same channels of distribution and potentially the same audiences. So the Financial Times is as legacy as it gets. It's quite old, has a core financial content, but it's a general newspaper. And the world in which people used to come to the website and used to sort of publish and pray is long over. You all know that. And what the world is now is a sort of post-website place where we have to go and distribute to where audiences are, but with a unique difference also, not just in genre, but in business model, where the Financial Times it's a paid content, are very high value, it's premium content, and one of the whole reasons for bringing people and still wanting to bring people to our website is in order to eventually become paying subscribers. So how do you then reach out to new audiences indeed reach audiences at all if that's where they are increasingly. You know, like every other publication, the percentage of traffic that we're getting directly to our home site is decreasing very regularly. It's still significant compared to other publications, but it is decreasing. So that means we have to be going where audiences are. And how do you do that? How do you do that when you aren't necessarily sure where your audiences are? You want to grow your audiences. A lot of what content will work on what channels is a question mark. So, you know, there are three things that we're doing at the Financial Times to sort of figure this out. The first is, well, we have a strategy, and this is the disadvantage and advantage of being a paid content business, is that we have objectives, clear commercial objectives, and that helps us in articulating a strategy. And our strategy is to grow our audience. We need to reach a bigger audience. We need to get our journalism out in front of more people, but more of the right people, people who are likely to subscribe. So that sort of informs everything that we're going to experiment with across the different platforms, whether it's Facebook and instant articles. Do we do it with what volume of content we put in instant articles? Apple,
doing it?
We will be doing it. Apple News, you know, AMP, all of these formats will be a question of experimentation because there is no solution. We need to be there, but we need to be there only in the extent to which we can get learnings back. Precisely because it's not a science. It is an art and it's experimentation. So we'll try something. We'll try a certain volume of content. We'll try a certain type of content. And we'll measure it. We'll get audience feedback. We'll measure the engagement. We'll measure the percentage of referral traffic. And then we'll readjust. So that's the first and the second thing. It's objectives, it's measurement. And then the third thing is learn from your peers. Listen to the feedback. Make some mistakes. Even if you have to do this in a relatively concentrated amount of time and on a fixed term, because ultimately there still are targets to meet, and we still have to be growing our audience, and we still have to be in a paid content world. We still have to be bringing people back to the website somehow and understanding and finding ways to give them as much value from the content as possible so that they will eventually want to pay for it. It's a scary world, and it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the conversation that I've had while here at Perugia has been about platforms and platforms being scary and giving away the control to platforms. And it's quite true. You know, I'm going to remain agnostic on whether Facebook is evil or not, or Google is evil or not, or Apple News is evil or not. The fact is, they're there, and we have to be there. In part because of the shifting balance in power. But how we're there and what extent we're there is a choice. And is a choice that should be informed ultimately by how well you're doing there. And are you getting results that align with your objectives? And if you aren't, you pivot and you experiment and you hope it works out.
You mentioned it. A big part of this is being able to make mistakes, and hearing that sounds like something that would be against the DNA of so many people inside the Financial Times, the idea of being okay with making mistakes. So how do you get buy-in for that kind of cultural change, and how big of a challenge is that?
It's a really good question, and it's interesting because there is a paradox around the idea of a sort of a paid content business with a pretty clear business model and a pretty rigid profit and target objectives, is that because also on top of it all, we're I think probably among the rare legacy media that make money. We're profitable, which is an increasingly less frequent thing in today's news world. The paradox of being profitable and making revenue is that we're under tremendous pressure to remain profitable. And that is actually opening us up to innovation and experimentation because we want to try whatever works. And because we don't necessarily have the solution, it is interestingly a real motor of testing and trying and hopefully failing fast, right. Not because it's like a cool Silicon Valley thing to do, but because we have to hurry up and figure out what the next more interesting thing to do is.
Yeah. So, Luca, you have a lot of...
I'm up next.
Yeah, you're up next.
Get
ready.
Fantastic.
I'll introduce and then you can go.
Yep.
You talk with a lot of publishers about distribution, right? Specifically around mobile in recent days. And is there really a trade-off between distribution and monetization? Are they mutually exclusive? What do you see in the conversations that you have?
Yeah, so, I think the notion of value should be kept in strong focus. So everything that René just said to me makes incredible sense, trying to have a consistent strategy, a consistent position towards or in approaching platforms and in approaching distribution. I wanted to take just a second, well, maybe a minute, to actually describe what the new mobile world looks like for those who maybe aren't too familiar with it or aren't familiar with it, which I think helps kind of sets the stage for the conversation that we're having. By the way, I work on, when we say mobile platforms, I work on Google News, I work on Play Newsstand, or for Italians, the Edicola Play. I work on accelerated mobile pages. These are all platforms that really work on mobile phones. So this is the context. In a very short time frame, so 1 or 2 years, maybe 3, the vast majority of traffic that is now accessing news content is coming through this type of mobile, this type of device. Forget the tablet, it's the phone, it's the smartphone. In some cases we hear 80% of traffic is actually coming through smartphones. It's a gigantic change, a gigantic tide that has just rolled over the entire news industry. That has brought to very different modes of consumption and modes of access to the news. By the way, don't think that these only exist on public transportation. People read news on mobile when they watch TV. So it's second screen. They use it at home. It's just a point of access to the world. It's not just because we're moving all the time. It is the kind of the reference thing. One of the things that we're seeing a lot is the notion of digest. Do we have time to go to a website and just swipe through articles and do this and do that? In reality, we may, but one of the fruition experience that is becoming more and more important is the digest. You get something in the mail, and we have someone who does it really well here, to tell you, like, what's the summary that you have to know? And I'll give it to you maybe in the morning, I give it to you maybe in the night, but hey, this is really the stuff that you need to know about, and people access the news through that. The second thing that is become paramount is notifications. So should I wait for folks to come in and read, or should I go out and just send we call them ping, a ping to somebody and say, hey, you should really read this. So all of a sudden, again, a user is being called in to look at something very specific and then may walk out and go somewhere else. All these are very new ways of interacting with content that didn't exist or weren't that relevant 3 years ago, let alone, the 5 and 10 years ago. So, and this is where I get to value. When a publisher has to think about these things and how to experiment, I think it's very, very easy to be tempted to just go out and money will be attached to the distribution. So distribution, and there is caveats and there is exceptions, but distribution is not money. It's not because all of a sudden you throw stuff on a new channel that you're going to make money because that channel is just cool. I feel very strongly about the fact that amplifying the audience, so multiplying the number of contacts, will multiply what you have, multiply the value of what you're selling, multiply the value of what you're publishing, right? If a page generates value 0.1, then that 0.1 will remain. It's not going to, change the world because all of a sudden you're on a new platform. So I feel that the challenge for mobile distribution today is really to think hard about that value. There has to be the brand at the center, and there has to be the engagement model at the center. I happen to have a distribution an experience in retail. And I see Andrea in the audience. I have come from the same world. Experience in retail. If in retail you do not have value, people will not buy. It's a fact. You end up selling at a loss if you do not deliver the appropriate product at the right time and with the right proposition. I feel that news has lost that notion of value. Now, for the Financial Times, the value is I give you a fantastic service of very in-depth analysis and qualified information and exclusive information to a specific audience. It's financial information, and I'll do that through a subscription. Great. Then when I go on accelerated mobile pages, Play Newsstand, Google News, not yet, Snapchat, or maybe not, Snapchat not, instant articles, I will keep that value proposition in mind and try to make it work. That's called consistency. It requires some sophisticated technical approach, because not all channels work with the same mechanic, but there is a very consistent strategy. Today, and now I'm answering your question, I actually think that 80% of publishers do not have that consistency and that notion of value in mind when they approach a new channel. A new channel is just, I'm going to throw stuff in there, and somehow value will derive from it. Right. But they may not have the right proposition in mind. Let me give you one last example. I don't know, if you're interested in the topic or if you've heard about this in this conference, but the value of advertising is challenging in this moment. The rates of, the yield rates of advertising on digital seem to be decreasing, et cetera, et cetera. Ask the Financial Times, they probably will say, no, it's not true. The value of ads depends a lot on the context and knowing what audience can be reached. Knowing the audience is actually a fact. I know who you are. I know your taste. I know your preferences. I know, your habits. It can be explicit. Some sites, websites, ask that question. Are you interested in sports? Are you interested in buying a car? Once you have that knowledge, then you can sell valuable advertising. Extend your content to multiple platforms, you kind of lose that information because the user is in reality operating in a very different context from where it started. If you don't have the kind of level of sophistication that allows you to identify that user across the platforms, then the value again is lost somewhat.
Or if the platform partner doesn't give you that information, then you're also at a loss. And you may want to think twice before you either go there or with what volume of content you go there, depending on what you'll get back from it about the user.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, focus and having that consistent, relentless attention to how valuable what you do is, how valuable, we're talking about news, how valuable what you publish is, that to me is the key to mobile distribution, knowing that all possibilities are out there and the ability to reach gazillions of people is a reality today.
It's interesting. It sounds like maybe there's an idea that's a sort of prevalent traditional idea that there's just one value proposition that a media organization can bring to their audience, and that's what the business is built around. But when you look at the way that distribution is changing and you have all of these different platforms, if you think about Clayton Christensen and what he says about understanding the job to be done, people go to these platforms for different reasons. When I open up Instagram, I'm there to look at beautiful photos, and I don't necessarily want to see a story about Boko Haram abducting women for slavery. It's not what I'm there to do, so you have to somehow justify the idea of having your core value proposition, but then adapting it so that it is actually targeted to the users of that platform and what they're there for, right?
Agreed, and I can give an example for that. Renee and I were at a conference last week in London, the ONA conference, and someone from competitor, Wall Street Journal, explained how valuable Snapchat was to them. And I cannot think of a more different audience from that of the Wall Street Journal sits on Snapchat, but they were also explaining how they had to adapt everything they were doing. Truly adapt, like rewrite from scratch, adapt the format, adapt the presentation, because otherwise it doesn't work.
And I think you do have to make those adaptations, and in two ways. One, who is the audience on that channel? As you point out, it's different audiences, or it might be the same looking for different things. So you're obviously also there to give them value, because if you're giving value to the user's getting value out of your content, and that's the relationship you want to build. That's probably the biggest single difference about news distribution today versus news distribution yesterday. But then you also, I think, you go in the proportion to which you can learn something about that audience. For the competitor publication that is on Snapchat, they have a Discover channel. It's the Wall Street Journal. They're on that platform. Most of you may or may not be on Snapchat, but for the most part, there are no 14 to 21-year-olds here, and that's the core audience of Snapchat. So if you're on that channel, you are targeting a future audience. It's probably not an audience for today. And it's a long-term play. It's a long-term investment. And any newsroom, no matter how big or small you are, has to make resource allocation questions. And so I'm investing resource to do that, to produce it, to distribute it, to think about it. What am I getting back? Am I getting back enough knowledge about this future audience that it's useful to me in my development, whether it's editorial or commercial or just understanding that audience better? And those are hard calculations to make. You just don't know.
It's funny because a lot of people right now, a lot of media companies right now are thinking about the idea of smart television as a future distribution platform, right? It hasn't become so clear that this is actually happening right now, which is what you've seen a lot of in your experience with WatchUp, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. When we think about distribution, there are basically two ways of distributing the content from the perspective of a publisher like René or Cécile. One is to distribute your content with your own product that you've built on another platform than the one where you have been historically, right? So a good example, legacy newspaper who is a legacy website and then goes out on Google Play or the App Store or the Amazon App Store with a known and operated app. Right? So that's one way. Then there is another way, which is to keep that same content, keep that same brand, and instead of going solo, building upon another product, like WatchUp, for instance, that aggregates a bunch of different news brands, right? If we take, probably to clarify, just an example, let's think about the movie industry, right? So as a studio, say in Los Angeles, I might, create a movie, and then, I distribute on, a theater chain, okay, that I don't own, but it's still my movie, or I can distribute via Netflix. And Netflix is that same type of aggregator. So we are doing something that is similar to Netflix, except that we're doing it for the news vertical in a way that is different, of course, because it's a free ad-supported model and not a subscription one. Now, to Luca's point, I totally agree with the fact that in general, historically, having a consistency with your brand, which I would call a voice, has always been important. Since ages. The New York Times had to have its own voice, very much like the New York Herald Tribune by the time it was different. And that was a very healthy competition with different editorial styles and tones and voice, etc. But I would argue that in this fragmented world where news organization, and that is the point that we haven't mentioned yet, do not control anymore the distribution, that's the key point. The fact of developing and nurturing a very specific, well-planned voice, it's paramount. It's even more important. Because at the end of the day, on WatchUp, the FT content is going to sit side by side with CNN, who's not a legacy newspaper, but still, treated at very much the same level. It's still video content, and so they are competing with each other. Now the question is, should the FT, in order to compete with CNN, CNNize its content? No, not at all. Just because it's video? No, because they are the Financial Times, and people are expecting a type of content that only the Financial Times can produce, right? Now, should they adapt the format according to the platform? Yes, but to a certain point. Should they go to Snapchat? Maybe. But if they do, they still need to stick to who they are. It's all about identity.
What about smart TVs? You didn't answer my question.
That's a problem with asking a question to an Italian. You know where you start, you never know where it ends. No, I mean, in the TV space, I think it's it's even more challenging for news organizations, especially legacy newspaper organizations, because video doesn't work the same way print does, and by print I mean also pixelized print. The formats are different. So what I've seen, for instance, are very interesting models. Wall Street Journal, speaking about that. So the journal started out their video push with a very much TV-like experience. They created a live channel, they had the studio that kind of, mimicked a little bit the traditional TV model. It really worked, I don't know. Another approach that a lot of those organizations have been taking was also to take somebody from the newspaper who had just written a story and say, hey, tell us about that story. Does it really work? No. Again, because you are basically, borrowing other types of formats that either are the ones that you used to use in the old world, like in the print world, and you are trying just to adapt them in a too simplistic way, or you're trying to borrow something else. So that's the challenge, right, for publishers. And so what I've seen, one of the most interesting experiments I've seen when it comes to producing video news has been AJ+. Yeah. Because they've done a fantastic job with, starting from the user, from a user perspective, user who's using, on mobile or on other formats, how does a user react? So adapt for that new model.
Yeah, so at Watch It, what we do is we're a video creation platform. So I have partners across Europe who are using us to scale up their video operations, which means I get to see inside the video operations of all these great publishers. Like we work with Gruppo Espresso here in Italy, for example. And a lot of times what we see is newspapers approaching this need for video with the solution of, I'm just going to invest in building a TV studio. And in my opinion, it's a fantastic waste of resources, right? Because putting television online, you can talk to the broadcasters and you'll hear it too. They know television video, and putting television online just doesn't engage in the same way. What people expect, what the audience has in terms of expectations for content, just doesn't make sense. And so when you look at distribution, and video is obviously something that I'm particularly interested in, the distribution, the type of content that you make for the distribution on social platforms has to look different. It has to look different. And I imagine that we're going to see new styles emerge for smart television too, because the context of consuming that content is very different than if I'm commuting and I want to watch some quick videos in my Facebook feed versus I'm in my living room, leaning back, watching through my Xbox a curated news program from Watch Up.
And of course, the type of content that works well in the living room, because right now at Watch Up, and I should probably say that as an aside, we are getting more than half of the usage of our video news aggregator product. It's actually happening on the big screen in the living room. 1 year ago it was 10–15%, now it's up to 57%. So it's fascinating, right? Because we're basically entering in that new era where people are getting their video news over the top, so with the set-top box that is basically bypassing the traditional TV consumption model. Now, what is at work? What is it doesn't? Out of a 1 hour news, traditional news program from CNN or Fox News, etc., what we get from those partners, because we partner with Fox News, with CNN, with Bloomberg, with all of those traditional guys, plus some legacy newspapers who are venturing into video. Mm-hmm. We get the snippets, some snippets of the programs. Now, guess what? Out of 1 hour of watching that news program and 20 minutes with Watch Up, you learn a lot more with 20 minutes with Watch Up. Why? Because it's a personalized news program that we've essentially created for you out of those short form clips that average about 3 or 4 minutes. So from a user perspective, again, because we always have to come back to that user-centric perspective, it's much better because I'm getting a personalized experience. It's not a filtered bubble because I'm getting it from a variety of channels all in one place, so that I don't have to download a bunch of apps that it's going to take time and it's clunky, etc., etc.
I think something that we haven't touched on yet is the technology of the users. Like we've talked about technology of the producers, the publishers, but I think a big part of distribution is what does your user have 3G or 4G? Are they on the Wi-Fi? Can they actually get to your content? And that's something that we really try to think about at BuzzFeed, because like 70% of our readers come through mobile, and it's mostly phones, like you said, rather than tablets. And so you're like, if you're on the subway and you're trying to look at an AG Plus video, and it's just, at least in Paris, you won't get it. And it's the case in a lot of places.
In New York is worse.
Yeah. So it's a lot also about thinking, you know, it can be something as easy as, especially for BuzzFeed where we put lots of GIFs in our list, but also in our news content, GIFs don't necessarily load if you have a slow internet. So sometimes we urge our teams to think about that and maybe put screen caps instead of GIFs if it's like from a video, for example, just a still with the dialogue written on it, so that the person on their phone, on their commute to work, can actually see what's going on. And it's especially interesting when you're an international company, because the internet in Mumbai is not the same internet in Paris, is not the same internet in São Paulo. So every team is thinking about it differently and sharing that with the rest. And you can have that trickle down sort of everywhere. And what we have also is when we write something on the website, when you preview it, you always preview it in mobile first. You cannot get to the desktop, you have to go through the mobile. And that makes you see, oh, that video that is so awesome is not viewable on mobile because it's an outdated, weird French media player. Let me see if I can locate it on YouTube or on Dailymotion, or maybe I should put it at the end so that the person who can't read it on their mobile is not stopped because they can't access it. So it's like really thinking of what sort of internet does your user have, and can your content get to them, or will they be stopped by having poor connection?
Yeah. So I don't know if some of you know, but and I don't know if they keep doing it, but I think, a month ago or a couple of months ago, Facebook announced that they would turn off Wi-Fi in their offices so that people could test the application in the real environment where the bandwidth is very, very low. So absolutely true. Speed is absolutely paramount in the fruition experience. So that's kind of without that speed, nothing happens. So I just wanted to take 1 minute. You guys will hate me about this. You've heard so many times. But Google is strongly supporting an initiative called Accelerated Mobile Pages that aims to redefine the way mobile pages are written, coded, written. That is not too disruptive, i.e. it still employs the same language that is used today, but structures the page in a very different way so that it loads instantaneously. So I think it's something that we all share very much, that concern.
Yeah, and I think it's a big part, I'm sure for you, Renee, like for us at BuzzFeed, when we consider, do we go into AMP or Apple or Facebook Instant articles, is both what data do we get back, like what value can we get from that, from knowing our users better, and how much better is the user experience going to be? And like you can see stars in people's eyes when you tell them, the page is going to load 8 times faster. And you're like, yes, sure. If you give me back data and it's 8 times faster, I'll do it. And, assess after a few months, what am I really getting at?
I mean, I think user experience is probably the newest variable that publications, especially legacy publications who've never had to deal with that. I mean, that was probably baked into the idea of BuzzFeed when it was being born. It wasn't baked into 100-year-old publications. And so factoring in user experience as a variable that's important, and okay, what is my strategy for distribution? As broadcasters, it used to be like, well, we publish, you come. And now it's more about where are you? How do you want to experience the thing I'm going to give you in the place you are? because what I want to do fundamentally is give you value. I mean, I have a core mission as a news operation of, you know, it's to do journalism and tell great stories, but then I need to sell this, and I need you to buy it. And so I need to factor in you, the user. And so user experience also, however, is a complicated thing, because is the best user experience on Facebook going to be instant articles? Okay, let's say it is, but instant articles is impossible in some ways to bring traffic back to a website, right? That's the whole principle of it, is consumption on site, which is the whole optimization of that experience. And then I need to consider, well, what am I losing as a publication, as a paid publication, where if you can consume all of my content in this incredibly engaging, user-friendly, speedy to download, you know, visually engaging way, that's great, but then what? You're getting great value, but are you going to get enough value out of it that eventually you'll want to pay for the content? You know, one of the reasons why great content still exists is that, well, some of it costs money. It has to be paid for fundamentally, or at least that's the business model that my publication has, which is quite different from Cecile's. So it's invariably going to be a trade-off, and the trade-off, again, is it's about being relentlessly clear about what your objectives are. For the FT to be in instant articles, it may not so much be about bringing traffic back to my website and getting you to pay for the content, as it is to give an experience of the brand, of the core value of the FT to an audience that may never have experienced it. And hopefully somewhere down the road, there'll be returns on that investment. But again, it's a gamble.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a quick comment. I don't think that legacy newspaper organizations don't have baked into their genes the user experience. Probably they don't have baked into their genes the digital user experience. But from my perspective, I mean, in the history of media, the newspaper reading experience is one of the best, still today. I probably shouldn't be saying that as the CEO of a Silicon Valley startup, but, you know, think about it for a minute. You know, the precisely crafted, you know, newspaper with, you know, the pagination, the way it's been thought, you know, for more than 300 years.
Yeah, the user journey is very simple.
Exactly.
There's no pop-ups.
Right, no pop-ups. Okay, you still have ads, but I think it's great. Now, you know, the main idea is, how can you translate, you know, that same quality in the experience in the digital world? It's not easy. There has been, I think, a lot of excitement when the iPad came out about that idea of reinventing a sort of a magazine reading experience. You guys remember that? No, I mean, all days now. Now it feels like 20 years ago. It was just 5 years ago. But then, you know, now for mobile, for the big screen, you know, in the big screen, you know, in the living room, there's a lot of that, right? Because it's a place of the home where that feels like a safe harbor, where, you know, it's a place where you go to be entertained, to be informed, you know, hopefully to drink a good glass of wine, and you pretend to have possibly an experience that's even better than the one that you have on your phone.
So I've got a question about consuming content on smart TVs, because for all of the other platforms that we've talked about, save maybe for Snapchat, there's a viral mechanism built into that, right? When you consume content on Facebook, right then and there you can share it out, and that is incredibly valuable for a media organization looking to reach wider audiences. Is there, from your experience, because I think that as far as the panel is concerned, you know the most about the smart TV landscape right now, is there that kind of viral uplift possibility?
Not in the sense that, you know, it exists on mobile, yet companies like Hulu, Netflix have, you know, amassed incredibly large audiences. I think that Netflix is now past 80 million paid subscribers, you know, in the world. 50 of them are in the US. So if you think about it for a moment, we're talking about 50 million households in the US who are subscribers to Netflix. There are 98 million of pay TV subscribers. So it's getting there, you know, it's fascinating. Now, how do you get those audiences? It's probably offline. You know, it's probably with
Or
you
at
know, a
least
very
off that platform.
yeah,
right?
very traditional, you know, I forgot the name in English, bouche oreille, how do you say
Word
that?
of mouth.
Word of
Word of mouth, exactly.
know the
Sorry,
word in French.
we are all francophone also here, actually. so you know, and that's, you know, probably more like traditional marketing, right? What's your take on that? From a Google standpoint.
I honestly, if we're talking about social, so social on TV. So I don't see it today. I mean, it's not that I can see it today, but I don't think it's far off.
Okay.
I can think of multiple ways.
Is it a second screen situation?
No, if I think in parallel
Yes,
about
yeah.
what can be done with voice activated commands,
Yeah.
that I think will enable a whole load of, you know, new mechanics where you're actually you feel like, hey, I'm watching a great program in this moment. I want to tell the world about it.
Yeah. So
you just say it, and then
very
somehow will
quick
pick it
comment.
up.
There's one example that I can think of. It's a multiplayer gaming
Yeah.
experience
Yep.
where, you know, it's very social, it's very viral, and still it's on TV.
Yeah.
So it would be great to have like the thumbs up, thumbs down on the TV. So I'm thinking of my kids who would just rush to it and just hit the screen. So that could actually work one day.
One thing that I was thinking about while you were answering the question, Adriano, is the way that Netflix has promoted their so highly used. It's a beautiful connecting website. And they give those really cool assets that go around their main property, and they use social media. And you know, Frank Underwood has a Twitter profile that's hilarious. So I suppose that maybe the viral mechanism isn't so much on the TV, but it's on all of the other ways that you can engage with the audience.
Or arguably, that's just a different distribution channel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we think of Netflix as being a distribution platform, but they're also working multi-platform
Yeah.
and multi-distribution in multi-format, but with different objectives.
Yeah.
You're probably meant to view the content on Netflix, but experience it in a different way in a different channel with different objectives. And I think in some ways that's actually a really relevant model for almost any content producer, whatever your size or your scale or your audience.
So Renee, you and I were talking about it before, how you have this experience coming from a big national public broadcaster, France 24. So can you tell us a little bit about how the view on distribution and off-platform distribution differs between a big national public broadcaster and a very commercially minded newspaper?
Yeah, I can speak to, so I used to be editorial director at France 24, France 24, which is a 24-hour cable news station based out of Paris. And it's a very different media environment and it's, you know, dramatically different in terms of the objectives. You know, one is somewhat public service driven and not profit driven because entirely government subsidized. And the other one is entirely profit model driven. And, you know, the core objective is about producing great content, great news, but, you know, but the financing systems are different. What does that mean in terms of distribution? Ironically, there's now an unbelievable convergence around needing to be on the same platforms. And invariably needing to be on the same platforms and competing for the same audiences is going to create a similarity of format because it is about user experience. I think personally the difference that I've seen is in some ways around, again, the pressure or the incentive to innovate. You know, I went to a panel earlier today that some of you were perhaps there when Aaron Pilhofer was talking about innovation and how innovation, we often think of it as being something kind of cool or funky or awesome. Woo, whiz-bang, awesome, exactly. When really innovation is about, you know, an iterative, measurable improvement. And an iterative, measurable improvement is something you want to do when you have the pressure of a return on investment. So whether a public company is better than a private company, you decide.
So I feel like been hogging the conversation up here, and we kind of need to open it up for questions. So please, does anybody have any questions? Just here, yeah. Do we have a microphone, please? Right there.
Thank you. It's a question, I suppose, to Renee and Cecile. I mean, we hear a lot about the breadth of reach that can be generated by using new forms of offsite distribution, Facebook being by far the most important driver of this, but also others. I guess I'd like to hear from the two of you about what your sense is of the depth of that engagement. Most publishers I talk to would say that insofar as they are able to measure this, because this can be very hard, even in cases where they can generate a mile-wide reach on offsite distribution, it is not even an inch deep in terms of actual sort of time spent or the intensity of the engagement. So that actually the majority of the engaged time that they have with audiences is still overwhelmingly in their own app and on their website. And if they have broadcast channels or even print properties that as far as they can ascertain, that actually the overwhelming amount of time that their users spend with their content is still spent in fairly sort of 2005 type forms of media use. So what's your perspective on that from BuzzFeed France and from the FT?
I think I have a two-part answer. One part is BuzzFeed is on Facebook instant articles, right? So that means that when people we are. So that means that when people find a BuzzFeed article in their Facebook newsfeed, before they would engage with it there, and then if they clicked, go to the site, and now a lot of time they're staying on Facebook, as we were saying. So I think that is shifting, but also it depends how you define engagement, in the sense that people have a very personal relationship to their mobile. I really believe that they have a very different relationship to their mobile, and because of that, to everything that lives on their mobile is way more personal to them. And Facebook, if we're, talking about Facebook, is very personal to them, because that's also where they have all their friends getting engaged and having babies and stuff like that. So you have an article in the middle of that. But what that means is that they also, I think, feel a closeness to BuzzFeed. They feel closer to BuzzFeed on Facebook than they might on the site or on the app, because they're having a different relationship. And we are very conscious of that and very much trying to build a community on our Facebook page. We're always trying to answer people in private messages or publicly, joke with them. The distributed content that we put on our Facebook page is also for us a way of saying, hey, we're not here just for you to click to our site. We're here because we live in the same space as you, and we want to talk with you where you are by, sharing funny images or like events or discussions, stuff like that. So I think in terms of personally feeling engaged with BuzzFeed, you can have that even more on Facebook or other social networks, because they can appear way more human than the website itself.
And it's a really, really good point, because it comes back down to what is, I think, if we had to sort of have a taxonomy of the importance of the different variables we're factoring into how do we distribute, that user experience one is growing in importance, right? And if the experience is more intimate and more relevant because they're experiencing it in their Facebook feed, you have to factor that in. I think for the FT, where we're measuring engagement pretty ruthlessly, probably in ways that are precisely around our business model, where I don't necessarily want a vast, endless audience. I want an audience that's a quality audience, one that is actually likely to get enough value out of my content that eventually they'll want to pay for it. And in fact, you're absolutely right, Rasmus. To date, the quality of engagement on offsite hasn't been great. What are you getting out of shares or likes? You get value out of a click, for sure, because somebody actually was interested enough to take the time to want to read it, or at least read the first paragraph or the headlines. We're all guilty of sharing something without ever having read it, because it was cool, because the headline was great, because it makes you look smart. or because you want to think you'll read it later. And none of those are necessarily going to translate into the kind of quality engagement of user experience or value, getting value out of the product that is relevant to any media, paid or not. Instant articles are changing that potential offsite experience, as are all the ways in which we're now, probably almost all publishers who have the resource are beginning to think about, as we were talking about before, like tweaking the formats to be optimized for those platforms, even if it's not like an imposed format, like an instant article, precisely because I think we're shifting all towards the idea that people just aren't going to come back to our sites. They are going to want to stay where they are because it is on their mobile, and that is where they are because they don't have 4G, because it is in any case a better experience. So I think we're going to have to recalibrate how it is we're measuring quality of engagement, and figure out what the trade-off is some point down the road.
And I would say that not all social media have been, or platforms for that matter, have been created equal, right? Probably Facebook isn't the primary place where the FT should be distributed, because at the end of the day, it's a platform, it's way, closer to the type of tone, editorial tone and voice that BuzzFeed has, And the problem is that the more natural platform, social media, where I would see the FT evolving, which is LinkedIn, is in steep decline from a product standpoint and from a user experience standpoint. They don't have anything like, not even close actually to the instant articles, where they should. And, right?
They'll do AMPs.
They'll do it, yeah.
Right.
But they're like,
I'm actually not sure I agree. I'm not sure.
their CEO is the chief product, but he doesn't have time.
But I'm not sure I agree with you about the relevance of Facebook to certain media. I mean, the reality is, if the Facebook audiences are growing, and the functionalities and the use that audiences are getting out of Facebook is changing too. I mean, I know increasingly people are shifting to Facebook for news and shifting away from it for personal reasons, or they're mixing it. It's becoming this kind of one-stream convergence of all content. And maybe not just Facebook, and maybe Google will be that platform too. But I think and you're right, that is the challenge. I mean, how do you stay true to your brand and indeed your value proposition? And in fact, that's the whole point of people coming to you, is that you are this thing. You are a reliable source of unparalleled quality financial news. And you need to be that across all platforms, but in the tone and the format and the voice that is relevant to that platform. I do think there are solutions to that. And I don't think that it's leading towards, FT and BuzzFeed Facebook posts being interchangeable, quite the reverse. But it's still a work in progress, for sure.
I think we had another question up here in the front. Do we have the microphone? Thank you.
It's a question for Renee, actually. I just wanted to shift for a moment away from social platform content to something that the FT has been doing, which is to put some of its content, like podcasts, in front of the paywall, but still within the site. And wanted to get a sense of how that's working for the FT in terms of return on investment. Is it driving people to subscribe? And also how you're strategizing that kind of distribution.
Sure. Audiovisual content is incredibly important for all the reasons that everyone knows video is important, and not just because Facebook says video is important. So in any case, those formats are key for distribution on all of these platforms, and in fact are key for even engagement on site, because people are using native apps or in general consuming content on their mobile. And as it happens for the Financial Times, like for many other paid content media, our audio and our video content is free. It is outside the paywall. So those are incredibly important formats for our reach strategies, for growing our audiences and growing the new audiences and getting people to engage with the content who might not have engaged with that before. Ultimately, we're still trying to use this content to drive traffic back to our website, so that people will consume more content or be engaged enough that they'll want to consume more content. And in any case, the way that we're measuring this is twofold. It is both about driving traffic back to the website, but again, in this way that increasingly people may never come back, it is absolutely vital to define what it is you want the user to be doing with your content offsite. And being very clear about that. And there's lots of things they can be doing with it. Podcasts are very hard to measure, actually, because people subscribe, but you don't know whether they actually listen to them ever. And that's actually a big issue that if somebody can figure that out, that's a startup to be done, is how to allow publishers to better measure the actual engagement that podcast subscribers are getting with their content. Separate issue. But really, what do you want users to be doing with that content, and then measuring it? Do you want them to be sharing it, to be liking it, to be spending a lot of time on it? Do you want a good finish rate? It really varies, and every media will have a different set of metrics, but it's key knowing them and measuring them. Sure. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Isn't it crazy that you don't know how much of a show somebody's listened to, because they're all listening to it through Stitcher or iTunes, and those platforms know exactly how much of a file has been listened to because they're actively playing the file. It's just remarkable for me that you aren't able to get that data back.
iTunes?
Yeah.
Like in our case, we work a lot with our partners to give them exactly the type of data. We are very respectful of the amount of effort and investment that has been put behind the content that has been created. Mainly because, and that's probably very special to us, I have a background in content production, so I know that behind now, a minute of a video, there's at least 1 hour of work that has been at very least. So,
unless it was made on Watch It.
Unless it was made on Watch It, where you guys do a great job for doing that. So, but then what I find fascinating in the questions that have been asked and the different approaches of BuzzFeed and Financial Times is that Financial Times is still trying to do what publishers have been trying to do with digital for a very long time, which is to, distribute and then take it immediately back so that people can consume more content on their own and operated site. BuzzFeed is embracing, offsite distribution. They say, we don't care about a user returning to our product and use it. Our product is there. So it's a very aggressive way of doing it, but at the same time, the Financial Times approach is more ambitious, because what they are implying is that the user experience on their own and operated property is actually going to be better than the one on the platform, which is very hard to prove. So that's it's a very fine line. It's not a critique. In fact, they've been pioneering HTML5. From a product perspective, there's, in the high end. But the long-term question is, can publishers still be distributors of their own content? And I would guess it's not going to happen. More and more, the next big media company won't have a website. And, AJ Plus, very interesting experiment, they don't have a website. Their website is like this, is a brochure. And then if you want to experience the content fully, you are going to consume it on a product that has been thought not for creating content, but for consuming it.
Very interesting. Any other questions? Okay, I think we'll call it then. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you guys so much for the discussion.